Hello everybody, this is Johns Hopkins with Baltimore Heritage, and we're back with another of our 5-Minute Histories videos. And today I'm on the 1500 block of Druid Hill Avenue in the Upton neighborhood. Upton may be best known for its African-American heritage and civil rights heritage, people like Thurgood Marshall and Lily Carroll Jackson and Elijah Cummings, among many others. But today we're going to talk about the building behind me, the small Brutalist architecture style church, Immaculate Conception. Now, if you are a church architecture fan, I hope you enjoy today's video. If you are not a church architecture fan, if you're one of those folks who, if you go to Europe after about your second cathedral, you say, I have had enough cathedrals, I can't do any more, and you turn to your traveling companion, you say, you go on ahead, I'll wait here at this cafe, don't hurry, I'll be okay. If you're one of those folks, I hope you hang in there with us also. This building is clearly not a cathedral. It is a small two-story building in the Brutalist style, and it doesn't even have any stained glass windows. So clearly no cathedrals here. All right, well, let's start our story with how this building got to be here. And we're going to start in 1851. That's when the first church on this site was built. It was built just a few years after this part of Baltimore started to get developed. Streets like Townsend Street, which became Lafayette Avenue, and Ross Street, that became Druid Hill Avenue, were getting subdivided and houses were going up. The big kahuna parcel that got subdivided in 1847 was the English merchant George Grundy's estate, Bolton. And that, of course, became Bolton Hill, which is right next door. So with this new neighborhood, of course, we needed a new church. And the Venetian Fathers stepped in. The Venetian Fathers are an order that traces back to St. Vincent de Paul, the 1600s era Frenchman who devoted his life to working for the poor and became a saint. And they established a parish here and built the first church, Immaculate Conception, in 1851, which incidentally, this is the first church in the United States to take that name. So kind of neat there. The congregation back then was blessed with some really good diversity of tradespeople that helped out with this first church. Early Baltimore architect George Heiser, but also a few folks, we don't know their first names, but Mr. Quinn was a carpenter. That was good to have. Mr. Grubb, a bricklayer. Mr. Warb, a plasterer. And Mr. Rosensteel, a painter. So many hands contributed to this church. Alas, however, it only lasted 6 years. By 1857, the congregation had outgrown the church. They decided to demolish it and build a bigger one. They wanted big things, and they got big things. This new church was 130 feet long across the sidewalk, and its sanctuary was 52 feet from floor to ceiling. Its architect was Louis Long. You may know some of his other works. If you've ever been to St. Ignatius, the church on Calvert Street, the lovely church on Calvert Street, that's one of his. Or St. Michael the Archangel in Butcher's Hill, that has been heavenly converted into the ministry of brewing. That's another one of his. But here it was a fantastic church. It was more church-like, traditional church-like looking. It had 10 big windows and an enormous 13-foot stone altar that was done by a stonecutter named Hugh Sisson. Some of us may sort of affiliate the name Sisson with beer brewing in Baltimore. That's true. But it was also a stone-cutting name. And in fact, as a somewhat aside, he was the stonecutter who designed and built Edgar Allan Poe's first memorial. Alas, his stone cutting shop was right next to the B&O Railroad, and a B&O train jumped its tracks, plowed through his stone cutting site, and crushed Poe's first memorial. So there's a little side story on Sisson the stone cutter. In 1901, this church had a whopping 350 lights on the inside, making it what the Baltimore Sun called resplendent. It lasted, however, about 100 years, but didn't last forever. After World War II, the congregation here had dwindled, and they were looking at a large building that needed a lot of expensive maintenance and no funds to pay for it. And in 1973, they demolished it and built the building that was here. There was a loud protest against that, that. Baltimore Sun writer Carlton Jones, some of you may know of him, protested, as did Hopkins architecture professor Phoebe Stanton, who also lamented that she didn't think this new design would fit into the historic Marble Hill neighborhood. But up it came in the Brutalist style. So Brutalism is an architecture style. It's sort of an outgrowth of the larger international expressionism style that started in the early 1900s. Expressionists, the expressionist architectures really experimented with shapes and sizes and forms on their buildings. Architects would call that massing. I think most of us would call it forms. But they built big cubes and blocks and circles and triangles into their buildings. They clearly wanted their buildings to look different than the traditional buildings that had come before. Brutalism arose in Europe after World War II, and it went almost one step further. It really wanted to celebrate the materials used in a building. And brutalism, the name, comes not from the fact that it's brutal. Some of us may think that, but it comes from the expression Breton brut. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right, but that translates into raw concrete. And that was the material of choice for a brutalist. Concrete where you could, unadorned concrete where you could still see, for example, the marks of the forms that were used to press it while it dried. And here in 1973, an architect named William Gaudreau really embraced brutalism with this building. Gaudreau did a number of Catholic churches around Maryland, and some really even more avant than this one. For example, the Church Lady of Hope in Dundalk. If you've ever been out there, I encourage you to stop by that fantastically modernist building. Some people call it a pyramid of dark brick, but that's one of his as well. Here, we've got a couple of really substantial brutalist elements to this church. The roof is flat and sloping. No grand spires on this church. There are no stained glass windows again. In fact, the only windows are the vertical ones here in the front. And the outside, of course, is this raw looking concrete where you can very much see the shapes of how it was formed. On the inside, there also, interestingly, is no organ. So this building's been here since 1973. Today, there's still an active congregation that worships here, and as well as sort of carries out the mission of St. Vincent de Paul. They work with the St. Vincent de Paul Society, as well as a group called Sarah's Hope that works to try to help folks who are experiencing domestic violence. So I'm going to wrap up by encouraging you to come on out, take a walk around this historic neighborhood, and take a look at this building. If you're with somebody, you can jump into the debate on whether you love brutalism or hate brutalism, or maybe just take a look at this building for what it is, an interesting piece of architecture in a really fantastically historic neighborhood. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.